Good morning. My name is Gerry Vandermeer, and I served as co-chair of the 191 Commission. I am pleased to welcome each of you as we remember the lives of the 49 loved ones lost 10 years ago today. When we began planning for today's event, we reflected on the past 10 years and decided we wanted this day to convey a sense of community, remembrance, and peace. Community for the unwavering support of so many at the time of the accident. Remembrance for our lost loved ones. Peace and healing for the families and our community.
Good morning. I was not of you 10 years ago when hearts were wounded and darkness came. I was barely here a month 5 years ago when this memorial was unveiled, glittering in the sun, reflecting light taking flight against an unseen wind, rekindling in hearts extinguished flames. Today, I am humbled to welcome you to this place of memory, serenity, and beauty on behalf of the University of Kentucky, who with our city is a proud custodian of these grounds made sacred 5 years ago. We're reminded in Psalms that sorrow endures for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. 10 years ago, our community was awakened by a terrible tragedy. In the quiet of mourning, this family, in an instant, was torn asunder, forever changed, and left with a permanent void that can't be filled. Those 49 names are our parents and grandparents, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, kids, and grandkids. They coached our children's soccer and baseball teams. They were our colleagues at work, parishioners in our faith groups. They were our friends, our neighbors. And in the days that followed, you were left with grief as you grappled to understand why and how something like this could happen. The next day wasn't the same for any of you, for this community. It changed our city. It wasn't easy to see then, but in the terrible ripple of change, we learned to find acceptance. Not closure, but acceptance, and the will to move with, not move on. Sherry Mandel, a mother who lost her children in a terrorist attack in Israel, reminds us that there is no closure, only disclosure. That victims' families don't move on, they move with the memories, with the pain, with the love, and with the will to survive and bear witness. This community is moving with. Included in the 49 was one of UK's own, Larry Turner, who was really known across Kentucky in his capacity of the director of our extension services. A testament to his notoriety and affection and commitment to others. Over 1,000 people attended this very humble man's memorial. His son Clay, in eulogizing his father and responding to the overwhelming outpouring of community support, said, "I hope that God can give me strength so that someday my own kids can say the same things about me." Larry was a man of faith, and while faith and strength from our Creator, however defined, is powerful, today is evidence of the strength we provide to one another. I have noticed families who suffer loss are often the first to help others. And whether our grief stems from a horrific terror in a city in Orlando, or natural disasters in Louisiana or Italy, or from an August morning in central Kentucky, our individual and collective strength comes from one another. No matter the source, it can turn our grief into goodness. And the memories you carry offer a sense of immortality for the friends and family you lost. As we let the grace of memory shine through us, we honor them, and in doing so, make our lives and the lives of so many others better. We move together with the shared strength that Clay Turner asked for all of us, that we yearn for, that we give to each other to make this a remarkable community. Thank you very much.
We're thankful that each and every day you have lifted one another up, remembering Flight 5191. You have been a source of strength and beauty and power and the grace to live the dignity and legacy of those who we still remember so beautifully. They are the ones that continue to share beautiful opportunities for us to remember them, whether it's missionary work in Ghana or continued loving efforts and companies and visions. So I just want to again thank you. Just keep this in your mind. My arm's getting sore, and I'm sure Pastor Luce's is too. At this time, I invite you to bow your heads and open your hearts. Most merciful and loving God, through our most painful experience of life, of fog and human weakness over 10 years ago, you came to our aid and received these precious 49, our beloved ones. They were indeed visionaries, leaders who ran companies, led academic institutions, shared in the powerful role as grandparents, parents, sons and daughters, spouses, and even newly married. Altogether, they were our family, and they are yours. We cannot know the plans or purpose that veiled this tragic occurrence, but mysteriously, like a phoenix rising, our hearts slowly began being uplifted by the courageous witness of these fine individuals. We would remember them in so many ways. We would have the consolation for having them in our lives, albeit shorter than we could have ever imagined. Yet, their families and friends took up from where they left off, became more because their lives meant and still mean so much more to us. We're given strength from St. Paul's writing to the Romans in chapter 8, tells us that shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or every sword come upon us. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. On this day, Lord, help us to be more than conquerors and keep our hearts full of grace and your peace that surpasses all wisdom and understanding. Help us to keep our heads up and our hearts strong. For we believe we are still connected to our beloved 49 on this pathway, this flight to you. May your mercy cover us all in this time of gathering. Let us be sharers of that mercy to all. Eternal rest granted to the 49, O Lord, and let thy perpetual light shine upon them. And may the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Let all the wings out there say, Amen.
As we mark this 10th anniversary, I want to speak first to the families. It is so inspiring to see so many of you here. Your presence reminds us that the human spirit triumphs in times of adversity. It does not fail. It does not fail. Your brave spirit is an inspiration for our city today as we gather to commemorate the memories of those we loved as family members, friends, colleagues, neighbors, those we worked with, worshiped with, those we greeted at ball games. So many of you were here 5 years ago as we marked the 5th anniversary. Anniversaries matter. It is so simple. An anniversary is the turning of a year. Nothing more, nothing less. Still, the anniversaries that matter most have little to do with the calendar. We are attached to the joys and sorrows of those days and not to the dates. And so it is today on this 10th anniversary. We are here in sorrow to begin a new decade of living with our loss. We are here to express our deep compassion, and we are here to find hope for tomorrow. We are not turning a page on the past. We are writing the next story for a new decade of how we shall remember to live. 5 years ago, today, I quoted from a letter from Deborah Hersman, who represented the National Transportation Safety Board at the scene. And thank you, Deborah, for being with us here again today. Deborah's letter talked about the strong and vibrant community spirit of Lexington. And she wrote, "Old wisdom says that time heals all wounds, but I'm not sure that is the case in such a public and profound tragedy. In Lexington, the strength to move forward does not come from time so much as it comes from one another. Yes, healing does take place over time, but even more so, it occurs within the steadfast presence of those who care for us, and that is Lexington. In this place, there is an enduring community spirit of generosity and caring. This tragedy still allows us to reflect on what a privilege it is to live in a city where we care for one another, a city where we respond to needs by reaching out with help and compassion. Perhaps one way to define that spirit is by remembering our first responders from that day a decade ago. In fact, that may be one of the strongest memories for families. Unforgettable displays of great courage, great bravery. So many small kindnesses, a generous and comforting presence. Our first responders earned national praise for their work together then, and today it is most appropriate that we honor and give thanks for their sacrifice, for their call to duty, and their dedication. Over this decade and throughout our history, our enduring community spirit has been our guide, our true north. It has been with us every step of the way through this tragedy and more. We know we can rely on it. God bless all of you, our citizens, and our city. Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you today to help honor the lives of those lost on Comair Flight 5191, one of the worst tragedies in the history of our city. Every one of us in Lexington remembers where we were exactly 10 years ago when we learned the news that a plane had crashed near Bluegrass Airport. Like many Lexingtonians, I was in church when our priest asked for prayers from the pulpit. I knew immediately that I would have known someone on the plane, or at least someone who was directly impacted by the tragedy. And I think everyone here probably felt the same way. Everyone in Lexington had the same reaction, minds racing to friends and family and whether they were on that flight. Despite being the second largest city in our Commonwealth, this is still a very tight-knit community. And in Lexington, we often say we live in the biggest small town in America. Well, I didn't know many of the passengers well. I did know some of you before the tragedy. And I have come to know many of you in the years since. Cutchin Powell was a friend from the University of Virginia, and he was engaged to Marcy Thomason. Marcy was in Lexington to plan their wedding and was headed back to Washington, D.C. I know Marcy's story well because of my friendship with Cutchin and because of how many people she touched. She was a beautiful, funny, smart, and for a woman and for a young woman to be taken from us on the verge of being a bride, it breaks our hearts to this day. Every one of the passengers had a story. They had a family, they had a life. And their anguish is our anguish, as their friends and as their neighbors. But we also continue to celebrate their lives, which continue to enrich us and our community. For example, Pat Smith, whose remarkable life was taken from us too soon on Flight 5191, was an active volunteer and leader in Habitat for Humanity. I got a chance to catch up with his son Brian earlier today, who I played soccer with when I was a young boy. And since his death, the Pat Smith Foundation has built or renovated 10 homes for low-income families in Lexington. The Marcy Thomason Student Athlete Memorial Scholarship gives financial aid to an outstanding senior student athlete at Henry Clay High School, Marcy's alma mater. The Campbell House and the American Red Cross recently held a blood drive in remembrance of all the victims. And there is an annual volleyball tournament to honor the life of Fenton Dawson of Lexington and to benefit local high school volleyball programs. These are just a few of the good deeds in our community inspired by this accident. No doubt there were countless acts of kindness and generosity on that day, many of which we will never know about. We will also never forget the heroism of the first responders who spent weeks in difficult conditions to recover and honor the victims and their families. We are grateful for their work. But let us also remember and never forget the ways that this accident brought us together as a city and reminded us that life is precious. The fact that the lives of these passengers move us so much, even 10 years after this accident, affirms not only the impact that their lives had on our community when they were with us, but it also tells a lot about Lexington. This is a great community, and we are all incredibly proud to call Lexington home. God bless our city. God bless the families of 5191. And may God always bless these beautiful souls who gave us all so much and whose memories will always continue to be a blessing to us forever. Thank you.
Yokoso to the Kono family. Thank you for so many of you joining us. I know that you have had the most difficult and the longest journey to get here today. 10 years ago today, before the sun came up, a regional jet with 50 people on board attempted to take off from runway 26. Each of you can recall where you were when you heard about the crash. Within a year, the NTSB issued almost a dozen recommendations: improvements to air traffic control, changes to pre-takeoff checklists, and improvements to runway and taxiway markings. All of these changes have made aviation safer in the United States than it was 10 years ago. Yesterday, as my flight approached Bluegrass Airport, I looked out the window and tried to locate the site of the crash. But much has changed in 10 years. Runway 26 doesn't exist anymore. The configuration of the runways at the airport is changed. Earlier this week, Jennifer Combs was talking to me about the ceremony, and she mentioned that trees had been planted near the memorial, the sculpture in the Arboretum. And she said we would be near the sculpture, but we wouldn't necessarily have a view of those 49 birds in flight. I guess it's a little bit like faith. We simply accept that it's there. Helen Keller said, "The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched, but just felt in the heart." And so it goes for each of us. We can no longer see the people that those silver birds represent, but we can feel the love of family and the kindness of strangers all around us. When 50 people met tragedy unexpectedly that quiet Sunday morning, hundreds of people stopped what they were doing to rescue, to assist, to investigate, to clean up, and thousands of people started to support, to pray, and yes, to begin walking that very long road of grief. So many lives were touched by the loss of 49 precious souls. It seemed the entire community was in pain, and this simple realization strengthened my faith in humanity. As human beings living together on this earth, we make mistakes. We disagree. and sometimes we even hurt each other. But in the end, we do care for one another. And when tragedy strikes one of us, or a few of us, many of us respond to the pain. Lexington reminded me, and I think the entire Commonwealth, that we are all part of a larger family. And 10 years later, many things have changed. Babies have been born. Runways have been built. Trees have been planted. The community has new leaders, and we've experienced sadness anew with loss of people we love, like Lois and Ray and others. But you have also found joy in carrying out others' passions, playing in volleyball tournaments, funding scholarships for young equestrians, and building homes for Habitat. But one thing has not changed. We're all gathered together after 10 years because a profound connection binds us together. Shared grief, shared comfort, and a shared commitment to keep the best and most beautiful things in our heart. In closing, I would ask just one more thing from each of you. In the last 10 years since the Comair crash, we've only seen one aviation accident as deadly as what happened at Bluegrass. But every day, we lose 100 people on our roadways, the equivalent of 2 Comairs going down every day. These deaths are completely preventable. I would ask each of you, when you leave today, to make a commitment to safety. Don't drive impaired. Put your phones down. You each hold people's lives in your hands. Thank you so much.
I'd like to start off today by recognizing the efforts of a man without whom today's ceremony would not have happened. In fact, without this man, our memorial sculpture itself would not be here. I asked Gerry Vandermeer to be our host today because he's been a part of our Flight 5191 family from day one. August 27, 2006, as manager of the Campbell House here in Lexington, he opened the doors to all families, the NTSB, first responders, Delta care providers, and anyone else who needed a place to stay, a place to meet, or just a place to find quiet in the din of the days and weeks after the crash. Gerry followed up his efforts by becoming a co-chairman of the Flight 5191 Memorial Commission and leading the community and family effort to create the tribute to those lost. This tribute manifested itself as the internationally known sculpture we have here today. Through the last 10 years, Gerry has been quiet and humble about his efforts and accomplishments, but his connections through Lexington and the effective leadership that he has have been invaluable to our Flight 5191 family today. Thank you, Gerry, for everything you've done for us. I'd also like to mention just briefly, thanks to my wife Wendy, who's here with us today. We endured a lot together in this past 10 years. And I've never seen a more strong, honest, thoughtful, or loving person. Thank you, Wendy. We invited anyone from Delta Airlines or Comair to come here today to join us. Thank you for coming and for being a part of our community. The Delta Care team that assisted families in the days after the crash was exemplary. My thoughts today are with the families of Captain Jeffrey Clay and Flight Attendant Kelly Heyer. There's one person who was on Flight 5191 whose name does not appear on the memorial. First Officer James Polhinky, the sole survivor of the crash. To Mr. Polhinky and his family, my thoughts are with you today also. As sad of a day as this is, we must remember that there are good things that can come from such a tragedy. Countless memorial funds and scholarships have been created. My own family has raised and given away more than $16,000 in scholarships over the past 8 years to students from our hometown in Boyd County. Memorial volleyball tournaments, 5Ks, golf scrambles, and other events commemorate the lives lost. Families have learned to celebrate the lives of those who were on the plane and use them as guidance on how to live their own lives. And beyond that, in the grander scheme, the families and friends have created their own special bonds with each other and particularly with community members. The city of Lexington truly is a small town when tragedy strikes. I've asked before, but will ask again. What kind of a person gets on a 6 a.m. flight? Lexington has flights going to Atlanta all throughout the day. Any of them are as good as the next. They'll all get you to Atlanta. Who gets on a 6 a.m. flight? The answer reveals just how much of an impact the loss of the passengers of 5191 was. What kind of a person takes a 6 a.m. flight? The answer is lawyers, business people, accountants, entrepreneurs, horse industry people, students, athletes, managers, salespeople, even retirees who haven't quite figured out how to be in retirement yet. These were people who were not only up and at the airport at an early time, but smart people, funny people, driven people, ambitious people, people who make things happen. The flight was a cross-section of the best and brightest, not just of Lexington, not just of Kentucky, but of the entire world. It's for that reason that the loss of Flight 5191 is so tremendous. I personally have had a lifelong passion for aviation. Most boys go through a dinosaur phase or a fireman phase or police officer phase. I did all those, but then I hit the astronaut phase when I was in 3rd grade, and I never really moved past it. So when I was young, my dad asked me, "How are you going to become an astronaut?" He knew the answer, luck and hard work and studying, but he was testing me. He wanted to see if I knew what it took to become an astronaut. So I looked it up. Looked to me like it was a pretty easy way to become an astronaut if you became a pilot. The best pilots were in the military. The quickest way if I was going to fly in the military was to go to the Air Force Academy out in Colorado. So I told him I was going to go to the Air Force Academy, become a pilot, become so good that I'll be a test pilot. They don't have the credentials to be an astronaut, and I'd be able to just go off and do that. Pretty easy. He was impressed enough that by the time my senior year in high school rolled around, I'd already met the requirements and applied to the academy. He offered me a gift. He got me flying lessons. I earned my private pilot's license when I was 17 before I graduated high school. He and I flew several times before I left for Colorado. I remember one particular flight I did after receiving my license. I needed some takeoffs and landings at night in my logbook. I've got a 16-year-old son now, and riding with him in a car is an exercise in stress management. So I can't imagine how my father handled flying at night in a tiny plane over the mountains of West Virginia with his 17-year-old son at the controls. But he was relaxed. He trusted me. It was a day that sticks with me, and I've thought about it many times. It was a day that my dad, larger than life, smart as a whip, scary, intimidating, powerful, put his life in my hands. He sat back and he enjoyed some time alone, just taking in the gorgeous scenery as we flew. Shortly after the 5191 accident, I was reminded of a poem I had memorized while I was a cadet out at the academy. It was written by a man named John Gillespie McGee Jr., who was a fighter pilot a long time ago, who had a love affair with aviation, as most fighter pilots do. But his poem has become a staple of the aviation community. It was famously quoted by President Ronald Reagan during his address to the nation after the Challenger space shuttle accident in 1986. The poem is titled High Flight. Oh, I've slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. So many people have been there for the families as we have navigated these past 10 years. We thank you for your support. We are glad you're here with us today as we remember our loved ones. We are pleased to have WVLK's Jack Pattie with us this morning to read the names of the Flight 5191 passengers and crew. On that tragic morning, Brian Jared, Pete Mompin, and John Sally were among the first responders on the scene. We are grateful for their efforts and have asked them to represent all emergency responders' efforts that morning by ringing a bell in remembrance after each name is read.
Rebecca Adams. Lyle Orville Anderson. Christina Anderson. Arnold P. Andrews. Anne Marie Bailey. Bobby Benton. Clark Benton. Carol R. Bizak. George Brunacini. Brian C. Bird. Jeffrey Clay. Diane Combs. Homer Combs. Fenton Dawson. Thomas Connell Fahey. Mike Finley. Clarence Wayne Fortney II. W. Bartley Frederick. Holly Gilbert. Eric John Harris. Kelly James Heyer. Jonathan Hooker. Scarlett Parsley Hooker. Priscilla Johnson. Naoko Kono. Tetsuya Kono. Charles M. Likens. Dan Mallory. Steve McElravy. Linda McKee. Robert I. Mew. K. Craig Morris. Leslie W. Morris II. Cecile Moscow. Judy Ann Raines. Michael Noel Ryan. Mary Jane Silas. Patrick Hogan Smith. Timothy K. Snoddy. Marcy Reynolds Thomason. Gregory Allen Threet. Randy D. Tolles. Larry W. Turner. Victoria Washington. Jeff Williams. Paige Michelle Winters. Brian Woodward. Joanne Wright. Betty Butler Young.